All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're tackling the Israel-Hamas ceasefire.
Yeah.
More specifically, those recent hostage releases
Right.
and all the reaction and fallout that's happening around it.
Yeah. Definitely a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got two really fresh articles from CBS News to work with,
Okay.
both titled, get this, 3 more Israeli hostages released by Hamas as ceasefire deal continues to hold.
So very much ongoing, it seems.
Yeah, and this
It's
is
real-time stuff.
it's more than just a headline.
Yeah, I see
It's
it.
lives hanging in the balance, high wire act, all that.
It really is. It's fascinating when you think about it. It's like brinkmanship on a global scale.
Yeah.
Every single word,
Oh yeah.
every action, every statement,
Mm-hmm.
it's all calculated for impact.
Right.
Both, immediate impact,
Yeah.
but also how it plays in the long game.
Right. So let's set the stage here. The big news. 3 more Israeli hostages freed on February 8th. This is part of that ongoing prisoner exchange, right?
Yeah.
And this is already the 5th exchange since the ceasefire started back on January 19th.
Right, right.
But the big question here is this real progress,
Right.
or is it just a pause
Yeah.
in a much bigger, deeper conflict?
It's tough to say, honestly. I think it's probably a bit of both.
Okay.
We have to remember what led to this ceasefire.
Right.
It was a brutal war.
Absolutely.
1,200 Israelis dead.
Yeah.
Over 47,000 Palestinians.
Yeah.
So every hostage released is a victory, a win.
Sure.
But you got to see it against that backdrop of just immense, immense loss.
Yeah, and I think that's something we need to keep in mind as we go through this.
Absolutely.
Because it's easy to get lost in the numbers.
Yeah.
Right. But we're talking about people here.
Human beings.
Yeah, like Ohad Ben Ami, he's 56,
Mhm.
Eli Sharabi, 52, or Levy, 34.
Yeah. Names, faces.
And the CBS article, it mentions that they looked, quote, very thin and frail when they were released. And that, I don't know, that detail just kind of hits you in the gut,
It does. And it raises so many questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, how were they treated?
Yeah.
What kind of conditions were they kept in?
Mhm.
What obligations, if any, are there during these conflicts to make sure that hostages,
Right.
at the very least, have their basic needs met?
Right.
We always see these really carefully staged releases, like
Yeah.
the white vans,
Mm.
the Red Cross handover. It's all very choreographed.
Right.
And it's not just for show,
Mhm.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
It's a signal that at least there's some level of communication happening.
Right.
And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of trust starting to build.
Okay, and speaking of signals, the Hostages and Missing Families Forum in Tel Aviv had a pretty powerful statement.
Okay.
They said, quote, "These are men who have endured hell itself. There can be no more delays." You
Wow.
can just feel that urgency,
Yeah.
that desperation. But what's interesting here is they've released over 550 Palestinian prisoners so far
Yeah.
for 18 hostages.
Right. Right.
What do you make of that ratio?
Yeah, it's striking, isn't it?
Oh,
And that's where things get really interesting in terms of
Right.
the negotiation tactics.
Right.
Each side is playing this very careful game,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get as much as they can,
Right.
but also trying to appear flexible enough to keep things moving.
Mm-hmm.
So releasing a larger number of Palestinian prisoners
Yeah.
could be seen as a concession
Okay.
to maintain Hamas's cooperation,
Right.
but it could also be a move to, build some goodwill among Palestinians.
Interesting.
So it's hard to say definitively what their motives are.
Right. And then you have the Israeli prime minister. He's vowed action, right?
Yeah.
He's citing the hostages' condition and what he calls Hamas's repeated violations.
Okay.
But what does that even mean? What action can he take that doesn't just blow up this whole ceasefire?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like he's walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
He's got to project strength to his base, who are understandably angry and grieving,
Sure.
but anything he does that's too aggressive
Right.
could be seen as a provocation by Hamas,
Yeah.
and that could easily spiral back into violence.
Right. Right.
And even the term violation,
Mm.
it's open to interpretation in this context, so it just adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
Yeah, it's like every move's on this chessboard, but the rules are changing constantly.
Exactly.
And then meanwhile, there were celebrations in the West Bank
Right.
when those Palestinian prisoners came home.
Yeah.
It's so easy to forget that this conflict impacts both sides so deeply.
It does, and that's something we need to constantly remind ourselves of.
Right.
We tend to focus on the Israeli perspective because of the hostage situation.
Yeah, yeah.
But for Palestinians,
Uh-huh.
these prisoner releases, they represent a huge symbolic victory.
Right.
They see it as proof of their resilience,
Yeah.
you know, a sign that their struggle isn't being ignored.
Uh-huh. And one story that really stood out to me was Eli Sharabi's.
Yeah.
His wife and daughters were killed in that attack back on October 7th.
Oh, right.
Imagine being held captive,
Yeah.
not knowing the fate of your family,
Awful.
and then being released only to find out that news.
Devastating. Just devastating.
I can't even imagine.
And his brother-in-law was quoted saying it would be, quote, another layer of torture
Oh, wow.
to learn about their deaths after surviving captivity.
Oh, man.
That really stuck with me. You know, it speaks volumes about the long-term trauma of this,
Right.
the ripples that go far beyond the immediate events.
Right. And on top of all that, you've got President Trump weighing in,
Oh, yeah.
suggesting that Palestinians in Gaza could be, get this, transferred to other countries.
Wow.
That's like he just threw gasoline on an already volatile situation.
That's a huge statement,
Yeah.
and it's already causing international outrage.
Yeah.
You've got accusations of everything from it being completely impractical to potential human rights violations.
Wow.
And it really throws the entire second phase of these hostage negotiations into question.
Right. And that's something our second source really gets into.
Okay.
It also mentions that the second phase of negotiations is underway.
Right.
But with all this turmoil, can they even hope to succeed? It's a good question to consider as we move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like trying to, I don't know, build a house of cards in a windstorm or something.
Right.
So this second article, also from CBS News, you know, kind of echoes a lot of what we saw in the first one,
Mm-hmm.
but it goes a bit deeper into those international reactions
Okay.
to Trump's statement.
Yeah.
And it seems like nobody's really on board with this idea.
Yeah. I mean, there are huge hurdles here, right?
Yeah.
Legally, logistically,
Uh-huh.
not to mention the ethical implications
All right.
of forcibly relocating an entire population. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Where would they even go?
Who would foot the bill for all this?
Right.
And what about the legal precedents?
Yeah.
The human rights concerns?
Yeah.
It's like opening a Pandora's box.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what's his game here?
Right.
Is this just bluster?
Yeah.
Or is he actually trying to force some kind of solution?
It's tough to say for sure,
Yeah.
but he's definitely thrown a wrench into the works here.
Right. Yeah.
The article really highlights how delicate this ceasefire is.
Uh-huh.
Both sides have made concessions to get here,
Sure.
but with this new wild card on the table,
Yeah.
it's hard to say what'll happen.
It really is. And while all this political drama is playing out,
Right.
you know, those hostages are still being held captive.
Yeah,
'Cause the article reminds us
Brave
that,
people.
yeah, every one of them
Yeah.
represents a family that's going through this agonizing uncertainty.
Absolutely.
It mentions Orlevi. He was at a music festival with his wife when the attack happened.
Oh, wow.
She was killed and he was taken hostage.
It's just a stark reminder that behind all these headlines,
Yeah.
there are real lives being shattered.
Yeah.
These aren't just pawns in some political game.
Right.
These are individuals,
Yeah.
families, dreams, you know, hopes for the future.
Mhm.
And their ordeal doesn't end just because there's a ceasefire.
It makes you think about the psychological impact, too.
Absolutely.
I mean, being held hostage,
Right.
especially in a situation as volatile as this,
Yep.
the constant fear, the not knowing.
the uncertainty, yeah.
It's unimaginable.
Absolutely. And the article actually quotes a psychologist
Okay.
who specializes in hostage situations.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that the trauma can be really profound and long-lasting,
Wow.
even after they're released.
Right.
A lot of hostages struggle with PTSD, anxiety, you know, just difficulty readjusting to normal life.
And then you add, like, the layer of Eli Sharabi's story, coming
Yeah.
home to the news that his family's gone.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you begin to process that.
It's almost too much to bear.
The article mentions that there are, you know, support groups and trauma specialists ready to help.
Okay, well, that's good.
But how do you even, I don't know, how do you even begin to heal from something like that?
Yeah, it's a long and difficult journey for sure.
Yeah.
And it's different for everyone, you know?
Right.
Some people find solace in therapy.
Mm.
Others connect with other survivors.
Ah.
Some turn to their faith.
Right.
But the scars, you know, both physical and emotional,
Yeah.
they linger.
It really underscores the human cost of this conflict.
Absolutely.
Something we can easily forget when we get caught up in the politics and the negotiations.
Right, right.
And
That's
speaking of which, both articles talk about the choreography of these hostage releases.
The white vans, yeah.
Yeah, the Red Cross handover. It seems almost ceremonial.
It is, but it's more than just ceremony.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh.
it's about establishing a process,
Right.
a framework
Okay.
for communication and trust building,
Uh-huh.
even between enemies.
Yeah.
It's about showing a commitment to the ceasefire,
Okay.
however fragile it may be.
Right.
It's like saying, we're willing to play by the rules, at least for now.
And those rules are constantly being tested
Right.
with the prime minister's vow for action, Trump's proposal.
Yeah.
It feels like the ground's constantly shifting.
That's the thing about conflict resolution, especially in a place as volatile as this.
Yeah.
It's a constant negotiation.
Right.
A balancing act between competing interests, ideologies,
Yeah.
historical grievances, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Both articles kind of paint this picture of
Yeah.
two sides that are deeply entrenched in their positions,
Mm-hmm.
but they also acknowledge the need for some kind of resolution.
Right.
But with all that mistrust, and now Trump's wild card thrown in.
It's hard to see how they find a path forward.
Yeah, it really is. So, if we're trying to look ahead here, what are the most likely scenarios? What should we be watching for?
Well, the articles give us some clues.
Okay.
The second phase of these hostage negotiations,
Yeah.
that's going to be critical.
Okay.
If it falls apart,
Yeah.
we could easily see a return to violence.
Right.
And then, Trump's suggestion might actually gain some traction as a last resort.
Oh, wow.
And even if they do reach an agreement on the hostages, does that pave the way for broader peace talks? It's hard to say.
It's a small step, though, right?
It's a small step.
Maybe a little bit of trust can be built.
Maybe.
The articles mention some quiet back-channel diplomacy.
Right, happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, maybe that's where the real progress is being made.
It's possible.
Away from all the cameras and the political posturing.
Right.
It's a glimmer of hope, at least.
It is, but we got to remember,
Yeah.
this conflict it's incredibly complex.
Layers and layers.
Historical baggage, deep-seated resentments, it's not going to be a quick fix.
No, definitely not. So what needs to happen?
Well, it's going to take sustained effort from both sides.
Right.
And pressure from the international community to hold them accountable. But I think most importantly, it's going to take empathy, a willingness to see things from the other side's perspective,
Right.
even if we don't agree with it.
That's a really powerful point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the headlines,
Absolutely.
the political back and forth, and forget that there are real people
Human beings.
at the heart of all this.
Absolutely.
People who've lost loved ones,
Yeah.
their homes, their sense of security.
Exactly.
And that's what we need to hold on to, I think.
I agree.
The hope that amidst all this chaos and violence, there's still that yearning for peace,
Right.
that desire for a future where Israelis and Palestinians can coexist,
Yeah.
not as enemies,
Right.
but as neighbors.
Absolutely.
Feels like we're watching this high-stakes poker game play out.
Yeah. But instead of chips, they're holding lives in their hands.
It's a good analogy.
What stands out to you as the biggest wild card right now?
Oh, it's Trump's suggestion, no question.
Yeah.
I mean, the articles we've looked at, they only kind of scratch the surface.
Right.
But the potential fallout from this, it's huge.
Yeah.
Like, just imagine the logistics
Right.
of moving an entire population.
Yeah.
Where would they even go?
Yeah.
Who would pay for it?
Right.
What about the legal and ethical side of it all?
Yeah.
It's a mess, a real Pandora's box.
And how's this playing out internationally? The articles mention the UN and the EU pushing back.
Yeah, they're not happy.
But what about other key players in the region?
It's kind of mixed, to be honest.
Okay.
Some Arab states, the ones who've always been wary of Hamas,
Right.
they might see this as a chance to weaken them.
Okay.
Others are condemning it completely,
Mm.
seeing it as setting a dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fracturing any kind of unified front against Hamas,
Right.
which could actually make these negotiations even harder.
So we've got these super tense hostage negotiations, this really volatile ceasefire, and now this bombshell from Trump.
Yeah, a lot going on.
What does this all mean for the peace process? Is there even such a thing anymore?
It's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Both these articles, they hint at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
This conflict, it's been going on for decades.
Right.
It's fueled by this deep mistrust,
Mm-hmm.
competing claims to the same land.
Absolutely.
So even if they solve the hostage
Yeah.
situation, even if the ceasefire holds
Yeah.
those underlying issues, they're still there.
And with Trump's suggestion,
Yeah.
she's basically pushing for a one-sided solution.
It seems that way.
You know, ignoring Palestinian claims and potentially making things even worse.
Yeah, it's not helping.
It feels like we're moving away from a two-state solution, not towards it.
It does. It really throws a wrench into the traditional peace process framework.
Yeah, it raises the question of, is a negotiated settlement even possible anymore?
Right.
Are we headed for something more volatile?
Something more unpredictable, yeah.
So looking ahead, what are the scenarios we should be thinking about? What do we need to watch for in the coming weeks, months?
Well, the articles give us some hints.
Okay.
The second phase of those hostage negotiations, that's key.
Right.
If that falls apart,
Yeah.
we could easily see things escalate back to violence.
Right.
And that's when Trump's suggestion, it might gain some traction, like as a last resort kind of thing.
And if they do reach an agreement on the hostages,
Right.
what then? Does that even, open the door for broader peace talks?
It's a step, a small one.
Sure.
But it could build a little trust.
Okay.
The articles mention that there's some quiet diplomacy happening.
Right, behind the scenes.
Alongside these releases. Maybe that's where the real progress is being made.
Yeah.
Away from all the cameras and the politics.
It's a sliver of hope, at least.
It is. But we got to be realistic.
Yeah.
This conflict, it's deeply complex.
Layers and layers.
Historical baggage, resentment. It's not going to be an easy fix.
What needs to happen then? What's the path forward?
It's going to take real effort from both sides.
Right.
And pressure from the international community
Uh-huh.
to hold them accountable.
Right.
But honestly, I think the most important thing
Yeah.
is empathy.
Okay.
That willingness to understand the other side, even if you don't agree with them.
That's a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines,
Totally.
all the political noise.
Yeah.
And we forget that there are real people at the heart of this.
Absolutely. People who have lost loved ones, their homes,
Yeah.
their sense of security, their whole world's been turned upside down.
And that's what we have to remember, I think, that even amidst all this chaos, all the violence, there's still that hope for peace.
That desire for a better future.
Yeah, a future where Israelis and Palestinians can coexist.
Not as enemies.
But as neighbors.
Exactly.
It's a long road ahead, but as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm left with this sense of, I don't know, cautious optimism.
I get
Things
it.
are incredibly complex,
For sure.
but there are people working behind the scenes,
Right.
striving for a better outcome.
Yeah. People haven't given up hope.
And maybe that's all we can ask for right now.
And maybe that's where we come in,
Okay.
as individuals.
Yeah.
By staying informed,
Right.
by engaging in these conversations, by refusing to give up on that possibility of peace,
Yeah.
we can contribute,
Absolutely.
even in small ways.
To building a more just and compassionate world.
Exactly.
It's a powerful thought to end on, and thank you all for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.